Start to record already.
I apologize today for my voice because I developed a severe cough. But I would like to welcome everyone to the February 7th, 2022 Landmarks Commission meeting. I hope everyone is well besides me. And without further ado, I believe, Madam Chairman or Madam Secretary, that we need to amend the agenda this evening.
Yes, sir, we do. We added something to the agenda last month, and then we forgot to do it. We added the election of the officers for this year, the chairman and the vice chairman. And then at the end of the meeting, we forgot. So I would propose that we would add that to the beginning of this agenda.
Well, I believe that takes a motion. And
Yes,
I
it does.
believe that Commissioner Schrader is the one that called it to my attention. And
Well, then I move that we change the agenda to have election of officers this evening.
do I have a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we amend the agenda to include the elections of officers. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I got unmuted.
Hearing no opposition, I will say that that is approved. So at this point, we will do this right after the welcome and introduction of Director Hand. I will now ask Director Hand if he's on board.
He is not here yet, so could we go
All
ahead
right,
and just,
so let's just go back to the elections of the chairman and vice chairman. And I would accept a motion for nominations for chairman and vice chairman.
Mr. Chairman, this is Mr. Schrader. If our current chair and vice chair, which would be David Meditz for chair and Karen French for vice chair, would be willing to continue, I would put their names in nomination.
I second. This is Beverly Easterwood.
I am willing to serve.
I'm
And-
willing to serve as well, French.
All right. It has been moved and seconded that the chairman continue, and that is David Meditz, and the vice chairman continue as Karen French. Madam Secretary, I call for the vote.
Mr. Chairman, you could just take a voice vote all at once, all those in favor.
Don't we also need to ask if there's any other people who might want to?
That's right.
All right, we can do that. I'm not trying to ram myself through. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, discussion closed. We now call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I
Any opposition? Hearing none. For the next year, the chairman will be David Meditz and the vice chair will be Karen French. Thank you for your support from both of us. And I will do the best that I can do to serve this commission well.
Mr. Chairman, since Mr. Hand is not here, we'll go ahead and go with the welcome and introductions. And Vincent, Gautier, did I pronounce it right? Is going to be our speaker this evening. And what I'd like to do, if we could just kind of go around the horn and everyone introduce themselves to him. And if there's like any short thing that you'd like to share with him with regard to historic preservation, that would be great. So why don't we start with at the top with the chairman there.
All right. Vincent, I am David Menace, the chairman of the Landmarks Commission, have served for a number of years. I am also a past president of Wyandotte County Historical Society, on the editorial board for the Wyandotte County Journal, have served on the Grinner House, and still serve on the Grinner House board, and other historic boards within the county. I'm a graduate of KU with a degree in history, with a double major of history and anthropology. That's enough to be said about myself. That gives you a little hint, etc. And we will go on to my vice chair, Karen.
Yes, Karen French. I've served on this commission for, God, it seemed like forever, but maybe it's just 3 years. I'm also on the Wyandotte County Historical Society Board as a secretary. I went to Pittsburgh State University, KU, Baker University, and Walden. My focus is humanities, liberal arts, but here lately I've been doing a lot of research, and I recently wrote a book on Quindaro Township, and it should be out by the end of the year, hopefully. So, thank you.
Thank you, Karen. We'll just go, I'm going on my screen. I'll just go next to Mickey Welcome Hill.
Good evening. I am Mickey Welcome Hill. I am a Navy veteran, member of the library board for the county, as well as the Landmarks Commission, which I have thoroughly enjoyed. I'm a huge history buff and poli-sci person, involved in politics since age 4, right at my dad's knee, and currently getting my college degree at KCK Community College soon, and I'm actually supposed to graduate with my first degree this spring. So that's me.
Thank you, Mickey. I'll move on to Lauren Taylor.
You're muted.
Lauren, you're muted.
Am I now there?
You're here now.
Well, that's good. My name is Lauren Taylor. I'm the editor of the Historical Journal here, the historian for the Historical Society. I'm on the State Foundation Board, and I suppose that's enough. I've been around so long that even find my name in some important places. Maybe that was public places, I'm not sure. So
Thank you, Lauren. Vincent, when he passes, we're going to stuff him and stick him in a museum. He's that important. All right. On my screen next, I see Cynthia.
Well, hello again, everybody. I'm here to stop by and say hello. Vincent and I know each other here. Historic preservation consultant for the downtown KCK project, historic district project, and I am on the ground and will be walking the streets of downtown all week long. So drive by and buy us a cup of coffee or a beer.
Oh, we know several places down there. Thank you. Next in line looks like Beverly.
Hello, I'm Beverly Easterwood. I think I'm the newest member of the Landmarks Commission. And I am a graduate of Washington University in St. Louis. I'm in real estate, have been over 30 years, and real estate appraising, and sales. I don't have a lot of experience on historic boards. I just like old buildings and old houses. So I'm always willing to learn more.
Thank you, Beverly. Oh, Mr. Craddock, Stephen Craddock.
Hello, folks. I'm Steve Craddock. I represent the Turner area in Kansas City, Kansas. Currently live in a 125-year-old home, barn, farm place, which is rather historic, we think. I have been on the commission for several years. Went to Wentworth Military School for the entirety of my younger years in school, and went to Pittsburgh, Kansas with a bachelor and majored in business with a minor in history. And as you can probably tell by virtue of where I live, I'm an old house nut. My vocation is the antique restoration. I'm a conservator of antiques. I do furniture as well as his architectural items, and thoroughly enjoyed my tenure here with the commission and the folks involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And I'll move on to Merle Bland. You're muted, Merle.
Still muted. There you go.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Merle Bland. I spent 40 years in the newspaper business, serve on the Historical Society board, edited its newsletter, History News, and I've spent several years on the Landmarks Commission.
Thank you, Merle. I'll move on to Jim Schrader.
Hi, I'm a retired architect. Last 24 years of my practice was with Gould Evans. I live in a 105-year-old house in West Height, the Jesse Hole residence. Lived in West Height for almost 30 years, or more than 30 years. Been on this Landmarks Commission too many years to count. And I've been involved with a lot of historic things. I've always thought of myself as a preservationist, but I guess maybe I'm now becoming a historian. Getting old happens to you that way. So,
Thank you, Jim. Moving on with my board, I will proceed to Henry, Mr. Hank Chamberlain.
I'm, as he said, Hank Chamberlain. I quit in the middle of law school to assume the presidency of a glass company. This is my 53rd year in the industry. Aspire to get the hang of it sometime. I am getting to be a longtime resident of Wyandotte County. I didn't grow up here, but I married a Wyandotte County girl, and here I am. I do a number of things involved in the community, and currently am a Democratic National Committee member from Kansas. I try to keep the politics out of the commission. I guess my claim to fame is I am an example of historic preservation. So
You do a well job at keeping politics out of this commission. I commend you for that, Hank. And no, you aren't that old yet. Moving on to another one of my commission members is Charles Van Middlesworth. We don't see his picture on the screen, but Charles, are you with us?
Yes, I am. You hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, you don't have my picture because I need a haircut. I'm embarrassed. In fact, that is too long. Anyway, I've been on the Landmarks Commission since 1982. Been chairman for a number of years. My education pedigree is I got a degree from Northwestern Oklahoma State University in 67. Went to Eastern New Mexico University in the early 90s and got a degree in anthropology. And my last degree was a doctorate degree at the University of Kansas. I've had I guess a building that has been my home that's for a lot of years, and I found out that old houses new houses have the same problems that old houses have. So anyway, it's now been a delightful time. So I'm looking forward to more excitement.
Thank you, Charles. And we're going to stuff you and put you right beside Lauren out at the museum. So don't worry, we will remember you forever. Now, moving on my screen, I know that Daniel Kuhn's here, and I believe he's our legal representative. Do you want to say anything, Daniel?
No, I don't think I need to be represented in that manner.
All right. Moving on then, Emma Dembeck, I see that you are online with us.
Hi, yep. I'm the AmeriCorps Vista Historic Preservationist for the Department of Planning and Urban Design. I started back in August.
Thank you, Emma. I also see that our dear director, Gunnar Hand, is on board. Do you want to say anything, Gunnar?
Sure, Mr. Chair, and I apologize everybody for being a little bit late. I got caught up in another meeting, but I don't think I missed much. I would just say that I put on a tie and got a haircut for the meeting tonight.
Thank you, Gunnar. And then the last one that I see on my screen, no, not the last one. Next to the last one I see on my screen is one precious lady. That is our secretary, Janet Parker. Janet has been with us forever also.
You're not going to stuff me.
Oh, don't bet on that. If nothing else, I'm going to send you all kinds of gift cards so you can stuff yourself.
Well, I've been here for 47 and a half years. And I, just so the commission knows, I did announce my retirement date at staff meeting the other day. It's January 1st, 2025. So I'll still be with you, but that's my goal. So.
Well, we'll see about that.
God help us.
Yes, that
I'm
is
vetoing
true.
that.
That is true. All right. Now, the last one that I see on my screen, and Gunnar, I am going to let you introduce him, and that is Vincent. So, Gunnar, I give you the floor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Gunnar Hand, Director of Planning and Urban Design. I know that this has been a couple of months coming, so I appreciate everybody's patience. We ended up pushing this into February. Glad we don't have to push it any farther. Tonight, we're going to do what I hope to become our annual training. It might become biannual depending on how we can put this all together and so on and so forth. But tonight, the facilitator for our training is going to be Mr. Vincent Gauthier. Mr. Gauthier can talk a little bit more about himself. I've known Vincent for quite a long time, over a decade now, in various different past lives, similar to our consultant, Ms. Ammerman, knowing Mr. Vincent Gauthier from her past lives. Mr. Gauthier gets around. He is very well versed in this region. He absolutely is a Renaissance man in the planning world, doing everything from economic development to being a developer, to being on various commissions. He was fortunate, I guess we were fortunate, to have Mr. Gauthier do our training last year for our planning commission, and it went off so well. And I know Mr. Gauthier has a long history in historic preservation. We thought we would bring him on for an encore here at our landmarks commission. So we're really excited about the presentation we put together. I think the way it's going to operate is occasionally myself, Emma, or potentially even Mr. Kuhn will jump in and pile on a little bit on certain slides. But other than that, the show is all Mr. Gautier's. I really encourage us to take the time tonight to think about what we do. I know very often we stay kind of at the surface level and don't have time at our meetings to perhaps think deeply about our ordinance, why we're here, the purpose of this commission, things of that nature. And I think that this is the time to do that. So I would encourage us to reflect, to engage, and to talk about any underlying issues that we think we have or don't have. This is the time for us to not just sort of get together as a team and train, if you will, but really it kind of serves as a retreat. What are the things we should be looking to do or fix, both in our processes or even be more proactive, which I think we've been trying to do over the last couple of years anyway. So with that, and without further ado, I'll hand it over to Mr. Gautier to begin tonight's events. Vince, do you want me to share my screen with the presentation and check the slides, or can you handle it?
I've got it, if that works best.
Thank you, Gunnar. And I welcome you, Vincent, if you do not mind me calling you by the first name. I know that some of my commissioner newest members have a lot of questions that I'm sure that you will answer or allude to tonight. So we're all anxious. And without further ado, the floor is yours from now on.
Thank you all very much. I just want to make sure you can hear me. Greetings, commissioners. I must say I thoroughly enjoyed the introduction that you all gave. I must say I too am a huge fan of Janet, and I probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her and Gunnar. And I want to say that also Emma's been very helpful through this process. You're obviously a wise group of folks. By hiring Cynthia and her crew to do the work in your downtown, you've shown that you are looking forward. She's going to do a fantastic job. I'm looking forward to the end result of it. You're talking to a national expert when you have her in the room, so that's fantastic for you all. Chairman Meditz, I'm very curious if you have actually a license to do taxidermy.
I won't admit to it.
Okay. I mean, there's a significant amount of discussion in that regard.
Well, I did go through a lot of Boy Scouting years ago and do know how to do it.
Well, fair enough. Well, I will tell you just a little bit about myself as we go through the process, but really, this is all about you all. And I just want to make, sure that everybody comes at it from a different perspective. No one has the same experience as someone else. So there's no such thing as a crazy question or anything like that. It's all about you becoming the best commissioners you can be. So with that, here we are. This is how you pronounce my name, Gautier. Pretty simple, looks just like it sounds if you live in Paris or Quebec City. Why we're here, basically what I said about being good commissioners, I will tell you that not everybody, and I'm not just blowing sunshine at Gunnar Hand here. He's a really good planning director. I know, I talk to folks, I've known him for a number of years. Not every commission has the, in planning director has the foresight to go through this process. This makes a difference. It makes you better for the people that live in your community. So with that, let's get after it. This is a little bit of my background.
Mr. Gautier,
yes.
I don't think you're sharing your screen yet.
Oh, I've been doing it the whole time. Well, let me get out of that.
Is that you? Did you get it?
Oh, you know what? I did not. Thanks a lot, guys. Here we go. How about that now?
Perfect.
All right. So there's an introduction from you all. Greetings, commissioners. Pronouncing my name, Gautier, why we're here, and here we go. So just a little bit about me, and you don't need to hear much about me. Just know that, as Gunnar stated, I do get around a lot. When you have a curious mind, I guess that happens. I've had an opportunity to work with some of the most amazing buildings in the world, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright and a number of other great designers, as well as small farmhouses. And I'm a big fan of the Underground Railroad. So I will tell you that I am really looking forward to your book, Dr. French. I'm very excited about that. So, and you will hear my comment about Quindaro at the end of this presentation. I get a 30-second soapbox, Mr. Hand said. So here we go. All right. We all have favorite buildings. This is one of my favorite buildings. You all have shared a little bit about where you live, you know, what the impact of your neighborhoods are. This is the church that I attend in Kansas City. It was under construction. It was just approved for placement in the National Register of Historic Places about 3 weeks ago. It was designed by a disciple of Frank Lloyd Wright and Barry Byrne, and it is of national significance, not just local important, but nationally. We'll talk maybe a little bit about that later. Most historic districts and National Register properties are locally important, but still listed nationally, which is significantly different than a local landmark, which is kind of the gist of what we're discussing today. So part of this process today will be about building trust. Really, the issue is folks in the community need to trust you. You need to trust your other commissioners that you're going to follow certain decorum and guidelines, and you know, trust that you're going to do your homework. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. By the way, I'm going to donate this to Janet for her retirement party. Okay, so this is really about a certain language. I was glad to hear that. I think it was, let me make sure I've got this correct here. It was Beverly is the individual with the real estate background. And a lot of this is real estate language. I've got a couple degrees in real estate and planning and architecture and all that. But each time something new comes into the world as far as this kind of world, and it's really about that language and understanding it. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, and specific to certificates of appropriateness and other duties that you'll be assigned. So in that spirit, I want you all to read. I'm just going to read this out loud. You can read it on the screen. And I'm curious at the end, I'll have a question. It was getting late and the bases were juiced. There was a 5-tool lefty on deck and a southpaw on the bump. Through 6, he'd been towing the slab well. Now with 2 down, he was facing this dead pull hitter with a slight shift on in the dirt. He ran the count full with a few high and tight that were spit on. He then went up the ladder one more time with a 4-seam heater. The lefty tried to square it up and go the other way, but he got under it and hit a can of corn, leaving the ducks on the pond. So we all got up and stretched. I'm curious, by a show of hands, how many folks are you? Do I not see any hands? Oh, we got one hand. So, okay, so this is a baseball. This is the language of baseball. If you were Rex Hudler or any of the Royals folks, you would be able to exactly share what was going on. This is my point to tell you, you have very specific language. There's a difference between a cornice and an entablature. There's a difference between an overhanging eave and a pyramidal hip roof, or I could go on and on, but you get the point. So this is kind of what you all need to learn through the process, and the staff reports will be very helpful in this regard. So this is kind of the language that you're dealing with, and all these things are impacted by what you do. We'll get to the fun stuff here in a minute. All right. So in the end, it really is all about listening. You have to listen both to each other, to the staff members, to legal counsel, to the citizens that are bringing forth, the neighbors that may disagree, and obviously elected officials and other folks that have vested interest. It's a lot harder sometimes when there's emotions involved to be calm and to listen, but that's the charge you've been given. Okay. Ethics is an important part of this. You all can have separate ethics training, but I want you to know that Gunnar and his team actually have to follow this AICP code of ethics. So I won't go into it in any detail, but it's very important, and we'll go through some of the aspects of what your do's and don'ts and responsibilities are as a commissioner. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. It may be hard for me to see if you're raising a hand, so please unmute and just blurt out. Okay. So why is historic preservation an important focus for a community? I will make this argument. This is my perspective. It's nobody else's. I will argue that historic preservation has very little to do with the past. It has everything to do with the present and preservation. You're really dealing with existing assets. You have choices to what to do with those assets. People are coming to you asking, people are asking, for you to alter a property, maybe demolish a property. Demolition is not a reversible condition. Paint colors are. So, there's a difference on this. So you can choose to rehabilitate a building. You can choose to add on to it. It can be demolished. Or a fourth option that people don't think about much is nothing happens. The problem with nothing happening is if nothing happens for long enough, it's not a good thing. So we can maybe talk about that at the end during Q&A. But to me, that's what it is. You have, at this moment in time, certain assets in Wyandotte County and all the communities within it that you are charged with making sure the most optimal things can happen with those resources. Okay. You have to work as a team. This is kind of one of my favorite images. I don't know if you all remember seeing this. This is built at the southern border between the United States and Mexico. And it's a seesaw that kids get to use on both sides of the border. And you know what? It takes two people to do a seesaw, no matter where they're located. Many people are involved and impacted in this process. So you have to take a very holistic view as to who is involved in these projects. And I can't stress enough that teamwork and communication is what's going to make a successful commission. I will note one thing. The building inspector, as we go through this process, you're going to hear reference to a building official. That's typically the building inspector. Obviously, they work hand in glove, hopefully, with Gunnar and his team, but that's who they're specifically talking about. That's somebody I think it's important for you all to develop a relationship with. And so perhaps having them come to the commission meeting at some point and understanding exactly the role they play, because they're the ones that are most often directly engaging with the community. Okay. So I love the fact that a lot of you have been around for a long time. I've developed a theory over a period of time that any commissioner or board member should not be lucky to be on a board for more than 12 years. And you should never have to be chairman for more than 5. we all have lives outside of boards. So that's my 2 cents. But what I'm saying here is there's a big difference between an appointed official such as you all and an elected official. And my guess is you're very grateful for that fact. Some of you may actually have been elected officials. I know that Gunnar Hand, for instance, used to be a school board member. Being elected comes with a whole different responsibility, but you all do have obligations. So that's what we're going to chat about next. Any questions so far? Okay.
I think you're doing great.
Well, thanks. You know, I think you're doing all right there too, Chairman. All right. So the Landmarks Commission is a recommending body versus a Board of Commissioners, which is a decision body most of the time. So I do put this caveat in there because there are a few things in it, and it's different. Just so you all understand, every state's different and every city's different because of the state enabling legislation and local ordinances. But in this particular case, typically the Board of Commissioners is the final body to determine what's going on. And for instance, they're even the body when it comes to appealing state non-106 and historic tax credit related issues. Federal 106 is a federal piece. It's legislation. It's a regulation that states that local state historic preservation offices have a responsibility to oversee impacts on historic resources where federal funds are involved. And I'm not going to go into the whole definition of what federal funds is or the word involved, but just understand that there are a number of ways that can trigger this 106 review. In that particular case, if the state and therefore the feds make a determination, the Board of Commissioners cannot override that. That said, much of the recommendations that you all make can be overridden based on certain language in your ordinances. But I'll state this, your ordinances do have teeth. I think they could be stronger. I'm not for an overbearing Landmarks Commission, but I think there are times, for instance, if a building gets demolished that you all know is historic or is being demolished by what's called demolition by neglect, because somebody may be letting some historic 1870s building rot, for instance, there are ways that you all can step in based on your ordinances to do some kind of impact, not necessarily eminent domain, but there's other things that can happen. If a building's been demolished, and I've lived in communities like this, if a historic building's demolished because the owner thinks that they can just get away with it, let me share that some communities will make them rebuild that building at their cost if they haven't gone through the proper procedures. So there's a wide variance. And by the way, I've sat in the court of law on the stand arguing shades of blue. To me, that was a step too far, but that's the way they do it in Natchez, Mississippi. So with that said, this is your charge. Do your homework. You have a terrific staff. They do good staff reports. I've read a number of them. Read them. If possible, visit the site, get to know it, kick around. You know, and if you can't, get on Google Earth and look at it. You all know your community well enough that it should give you some pretty good context. Google Earth is a great resource. And then ask questions. Nothing is a bad question. You never know, but probably 3 or 4 of the people sitting next to you have the same darn question if it's that burning. Okay. So now this is the process. You need to be deliberate. You need to be intentional. You really need to make sure you listen, read, do your research to understand the facts. Some things seem pretty simple, And then you find out not necessarily as simple as you think. And I'll tell you a story in just a bit here, how that personally affected me. And as you're doing that, there's a certain level of decorum. If you all haven't read Robert Rules of Order lately, I highly recommend. It's a short read. It's good for the beach if you're going anywhere in the next month or two, or sitting by a lake, drinking something good. Get to know Robert Rules of Order. Your commission chair is the one who's directing the proceedings, and you need to defer to the chair, whomever that may be, because if Mr. Meditz is not available, it's the vice chair that steps in and will direct the meetings. And be civil. And this is not just with the people that are in front of you, but with your fellow commissioners. I'm glad to hear the bit. And you guys are dealing with churches, you're dealing with religion, you're dealing with areas that may be racially integrated, that you need to address that. So, I mean, there are a number of hot points that may come up. Just use decorum. And what was it Thomas Jefferson said? If you're angry, count to 10. If you're really angry, count to 100. The one thing about commissioners is you can be quiet if you want. You can hit that mute button and just scream if you need. So that is my advice for today. Scream during the mute button. Okay. Ex parte discussions. It doesn't happen as much with, say, a landmarks commission as it may say with a land bank or a planning commission, board of zoning appeal, but it's still applicable. If people engaged in the process, including council or commission member, like board of commission members, neighborhood interested parties, the owner of the property themselves, have side conversations with you, it is your obligation to speak about that and share the who, when, and what of that conversation. Doesn't need to be in great detail, but it needs to be aired publicly, at least with the staff and the other commissioners. Any questions on that? I will tell you, if you do this religiously, you will be in the top 5% of commissions in the country.
I think just to pile on that one, guys, I think that's incredibly important. We made this point to our planning commission in Boza when we did our training. The truth is, not even the board of commissioners do this accurately on a regular basis. Not that they are held to a different standard than we are, but I think it's critical. A lot of times we just say yes or no, we did or didn't. And technically, by the rule of law, we were supposed to say who, when, and what. Again, nothing in great detail, but I would encourage us to be thorough when we're disclosing ex parte discussions. It's a really important part of the conversation. But I would just make sure we do that. I think Janet can hold us to that in the meetings, because often it's something that's easy to just glaze over. But again, I think it brings forward the transparency that's necessary for us to do our work.
I think that's very important, Gunnar and Vincent, because this is conversations that we've had in the past. And I think this commission has done a very good job in the past at times, because they've asked questions in reference to that is, what is our responsibility and what is, who is, et cetera, on the who, when, and what part of it. So thank you for those comments.
Thank you. I have faith in you guys. I already like your wisdom, so I think you can deliver. All right, here's a few more do's and don'ts for commissioners. I think this is pretty understandable, but it's important that you do it. I don't know how else to say it, but you see all of these right here. If there's anybody that understands, I will say planning commissions and historic preservation commissions very often want to know, what are you going to do with it? Why are you doing this and that? And all of a sudden you're talking about business plans and how's it going to get financed and all that. And that is outside of your pure purview. Now, if you're doing an addition to a property, it's kind of hard to say, you know, what its function is, but really you are looking to see whether or not it meets the Secretary of Interior standards. And it's up to other building officials to ensure that the use is inside, whether it's a daycare center or, you know, a spa room, it's appropriate for that particular property.
Vince,
I do have a question. This is Commissioner Schrader. Often our applicants and other speakers bring all of these things up.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how are we supposed to address that?
They can do it, you can't.
But can we respond?
I'm going to defer to counsel on that.
Daniel, are you on board?
I am. Commissioner Schrader, I'm not sure what you mean by respond. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more?
Well, they bring up the fact, well, it's going to cost me this much and whatever. I mean, do we just have to say mute? Or do we go, or do we say we can't discuss that? I mean, what's our response when they bring up, because it happens all the time. They come in and go, well, this is going to cost me a lot of money. I've already done this. We're building this for children. I don't care what it is, or this is for the betterment of the community. All of these things that, that applicants come before us saying, basically, I want to do what I want to do. I don't care what you do.
Right. And I as I understand the point that Mr. Gauthier is making is that those considerations aren't part of the commission's analysis.
Okay.
So they really aren't relevant. It's not that they're necessarily forbidden or that there's any sort of privacy that's invaded, but simply that they're not relevant to your decision.
Okay, well, I get that part. All right.
Mr. Schrader, what I'll often do, and this happens more in planning commission hearings, happens regularly in planning commission hearings, I'll just have to say that is not a factor to be considered. And I think that can sound harsh, but I think we also do a very good job on this commission appreciating and thanking people for investing in our community and on these types of projects and specific to historic preservation. So I think correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Kuhn, but I think it's okay to acknowledge that and appreciate that they're investing in our community, but the dollar amount doesn't matter at all. And I think it's not a factor to be considered is a pretty good catch-all.
I have something on that. And since we are in closed where we can talk about previous issues, I'm assuming, the college.
This is a public meeting that's being recorded.
Okay, I don't know how to ask this question then.
Can I interject then for a second, please? Mickey, what I'd like to share is there is one instance with regard to landmarks commissions where finance issues is relevant.
And it's not a dramatic pause, that's the internet.
There can be an issue, undue hardship. And in creating those undue hardships, that does need to be evaluated. It can be rather subjective, but it is an issue that may come up. The difference between a $1,500 window and an $1,800 window, that $300, if you're replacing 8 of them, may not be what I would consider. I think most folks would not consider that to be problematic if you have the charge that you have. But if it's an issue of having to do something that costs $300,000 versus $50,000 that may be considered acceptable, then that's where it's applicable.
That's not what I'm thinking about. And let me try and throw this out there. If the applicant comes before us and they want to do demolition on an existing structure and they do not have the financing or financial resources to ensure that the project is not going to leave the existing site worse than what it was, I think we have an obligation to know that before approving said demolition.
I think as chairman, I will bite the bullet. And I think what she is trying to say is the Landmarks Commission feels that this structure possibly could be saved, maybe not, etc. But depending on funding, we do not want to approve demolition and then end up with nothing but a big hole in the ground.
Well, this is probably the biggest issue that most commissioners deal with. I will say this may be where inaction is the proper action, where you say, we will table this until further studies are done, whether the city or the unified government has to go in and use their own engineers to prove whether or not the building's stable, or, you know, if you have an amicus, a friend of the community, you know, for instance, the historical society that's willing to foot part of the bill on that. Or you can just say, I mean, again, you can just pause it unless it is a life safety issue. And that's where, again, you can defer to your own building inspector. And if it's not a life safety issue, then there's nothing wrong with you going through the process to ensure that it's done properly. Does that make sense?
It does, but it doesn't address the issue. And Gunnar, I know you know what issue I'm bringing up. And I think we have a responsibility to know about the fiscal aspects in order to make the best decisions for the people who have put us where we are and to serve them.
Mr. Gauthier, I think one thing that we encounter on the commission more than once over time is a demolition application that's justified by the proponent because they say that that restoration of the structure is not economically viable, that it would cost too much to restore the property to a usable condition, and they can't cost justify it, so they want to tear it down. And then we get into this thing where we are brought estimates of renovation costs, and having been, spent 53 years in construction related industries, sometimes I'm skeptical of the estimated cost. We could really get bogged down in trying to consider the economics.
So do you demolish the building, correct? So
yeah.
There's nothing wrong, again, with holding off and using the resources you have. If that's an advocacy group, such as the Historical Society, bringing in the State Historic Preservation Office. They have architects on staff that can make recommendations that would be different. Look, I've personally gone through this a number of times, both a community person, as a developer. I had to save, so that steel structure of the church I showed you, the building next door was an old school. And the owner of that, which was a very powerful institution, wanted to demolish it and brought in a contractor who took 4 pictures of a rusted beam and said the thing's falling down. So it was our obligation to go as the neighborhood and the neighboring property to bring in our own professionals to say, no, that's malarkey. And when you have that, then you can start to have a very legitimate conversation. And I think Historic Kansas City Foundation, the Historical Society, the SHPO, there's a number of people and professionals even on your staff can make those arguments. And it's one of the reasons, by the way, that the state requires that 40% of you commissioners have professional backgrounds. Do not, just like you did there, don't be hesitant to say, I've spent 53 years in the building related field. I find you're a non-invested party as to what this would cost. And if nothing else, and I hate to say this, but you are kicking the can down the road long enough that the building doesn't get demolished. And it can amazing what can happen in a few months when people start to talk.
And
I wrote down the word malarkey. I am happy to have learned the proper term.
And to Mr. Chamberlain's credit, he has definitely cited his work experience on certain cases in this matter before. So I do appreciate that. I would just like to, again, I think we all know what we're talking about here, and I think it does apply to future scenarios. I think we need to not be afraid of slowing a process down. That is exactly sometimes why we're here. Things want to move faster than we are able to review them, or we might think they need more time to be reviewed. The things that Mr. Gauthier said, that is part of a function of the commission process, regardless of whether you're a landmarks commission or otherwise. It's okay to ask for more information. It's okay to ask staff to verify that information. It's okay to put things off until you're comfortable making any decision for that matter. Within reason, perhaps I should say, just as a caveat. But I think the other thing that I think inaction, i.e. no demolition, or denying a C of A for a demolition permit might be the answer, right? It could have been the answer. I think that we have to understand that we're not necessarily, we're a recommending body, right? So if they don't like what you guys said, they have the right to take that up at the Board of Commissioners, and the Board of Commissioners has the right to overturn you. So principally, if we as a commission are against a C of A for a demolition for whatever reason, perhaps we should think about principally making that decision and then just deferring it on to the Board of Commissioners. Maybe that is part of the role. I don't know. It's not explicit in the ordinance. But I think if we stand by, I think what is explicit in our ordinance is to preserve these structures and to do everything that we can to preserve those structures, even if it's not the politically correct decision to make by the commission. I think commissions, especially appointed commissions, are meant to be, you're not the decision makers, right? You're the recommending body. So if you don't think it should, even though some of our permits stop with us if they don't get appealed, and it feels like it's some level of finality on the decisions that you all make, I would encourage us to think about that. You are definitely charged with protecting these structures. You are not charged with protecting someone's bottom line.
So
Well
Gunnar,
said.
within our do's and don'ts that we actually have, is there anything that says we are not allowed to discuss financing, tax status, business plans, or anything like that, because we have had to ask those tough questions in order to know how for us to do our jobs?
Our ordinance says that we basically follow the Secretary of Interior standards, which do not talk about money at all. And again, if you want to, you could think about it for the one caveat that Vincent mentioned in terms of, is it, egregious or whatever. I think you can think about it this way. If money isn't a factor to be considered, then it's the politician's decision to make, not the recommending body's decision to make.
I wish not to belabor this issue here because I think we can move on. But,
Sorry, David.
that's all right, Mickey. I think the questions are very, very good. That is what we need to know. That's what we need to understand. If you remember, several times in our meetings, I said that we can only make decisions based upon these certain criteria, which is presented within the staff report. And that's basically what our responsibility is that criteria which the staff reports on. However, I do have a question, Vincent, and you may answer this later on in the presentation. We do not talk about protected classes. We do not ask about tax status. We do not ask about project financing. We do not ask about business plans. Discuss other items outside to be considered. Agreed, because we can only base our decisions on these 10 or 12 points. However, I have assigned Commissioner Schrader to a subcommittee to try to educate the citizenship and the community on these essential items. And I'll put it bluntly, do you feel that is our responsibility? Or if it's been abdicated by someone else, that we need to, as a commission, to try to do this so these items don't come up before us on an application?
Chairman Meditz, I want everybody to know that I did not pay you to ask that question, because the next slide is your primary mandate and your other commission functions, which includes advocacy for preservation. So you are doing the exact correct thing in doing that. And I will tell you, in regard to that, I truly believe, and I stated it earlier, I don't think you need to be an overreaching governmental body. But I will say this, compared to a lot of preservation commissions around the country, the state of Kansas is particularly strong in their oversight, but the individual certified local governments and communities within Kansas typically don't have strong ordinances with a lot of teeth. And if you want more teeth, then you need to work with your commissioners and the board of commissioners to understand why it makes more sense to add a little bit more gumption behind your ordinances and give you all that teeth. If in fact you recognize that historic preservation and therefore economic development, tourism, all of the things that come from that are a major importance to the community. So that's my 2 cents. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Continue.
All
You're
right.
doing well.
Thanks. I've gone from doing great to doing well. By the end, I'm going to be doing fair, and you're going to be happy with it. So okay. So again, it's really about doing certificates of appropriateness. And this is all about the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. And we're going to go through those individually, but you really do have other responsibilities. And one of the reasons that you've hired the wonderful Cynthia is because, and her firm, is because you're going out designating areas that should be preserved in posterity. And that's critically important. Can other folks do it? Can business associations, individual property owners? Sure, but nobody has the holistic viewpoint and basically responsibility for the full community that you do it as establish and promulgate rules. You know, this is one of my little soapboxes, if I may, Gunner. I would consider adding tougher language for penalties for demolition. You have a smaller penalty. Most communities have that level penalty on a day-to-day basis. So for every day that the building is demolished and is not rebuilt or reconstructed to where they're point, they are charged $250. Well, $250 a day can build up pretty quickly. And it will make people think twice about demolishing a building, quote unquote, accidentally or intentionally, if they know that that's the stick. I'm not a big stick guy. I prefer carrots, but occasionally you need the stick. And especially if people have been abusing the process. So that's my 2 cents. Okay. Let me go to the next one here. All right. One of the things that you all have, and it's getting better all the time, is you have terrific resources, GIS resources and that. And I think with the new district that's going to be created downtown, you're going to even have better resources. You can really dig in from the comfort of your own home or from your office and dig into what's going on in these particular properties. This is a kind of an important time to talk about a little bit of the history, as I understand it, of how this commission has worked. You have been reviewing certificates of appropriateness for both National Register and locally landmarked properties. Your ordinance does not give you that right nor obligation. You're fully responsible for locally landmarked properties, but not for properties that are solely in the National Register. And by the way, it's in the register because it's a book and you put it in the book. So it's listed in the National Register. I know that you've probably had some discussions on that in the past, but that's absolutely the way it is. There's also state listings. They're a little bit rarer, but in the same case, both federal and state are not part of your purview. That said, you can encourage properties to be listed in the National Register, but for certificates of appropriateness, it's strictly for locally landmarked structures and districts.
This is Commissioner Schrader. I've got a question. Up until a few months ago, we had been reviewing National Register only projects for 10 years.
It was a mistake.
But we got a legal interpretation that that was what we were supposed to do 10 years ago.
The lawyer made a mistake. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. That's what local land, I mean, if you're, and I've read your ordinance over somewhat ad nauseum. The state, again, the state of Kansas is very unique in that they are given, the State Historic Preservation Office is given the right to review any building permit that's pulled on a property that's deemed National Register eligible. But that's different than the certificate of appropriateness process that the local landmark commission that you are is charged with overseeing.
Mr. Schrader, as a part of our review of the ordinance update with SHPO, that was made abundantly clear to us that we had to separate our local landmark from state and federal landmarks. And I think that is part of the decoupling that we're working through right now, both on our maps as well as within our ordinance. They basically threatened our CLG status with that interpretation.
And that's not going to change.
That is not going to change.
Even with negotiation.
What's going to happen with our, we're still in the process of updating our CLG status for the unified government because it's still currently with the city of Kansas City, Kansas. And they want that to change. That has to go all the way through the national park system accordingly. But once we lock in the CLG update agreement, we are and have started the conversation about what things locally we can review for the state. And so that is getting worked out right now. So a lot of the permitting that happens, for instance, in West Height, for small electrical permits to replace furnaces and stuff, technically, again, the way that the state law is written, and as we have come to understand, the state of Kansas has one of the strongest state statutes for historic preservation. Any permit of a local jurisdiction in a either district or landmark, and everything's a district for the SHPO, has to go through SHPO review. So those are the things that we're going to sort of weed out so that we can keep moving through those things that don't really impact a building. or that we think we can manage the impact of those buildings without SHPO's review on us. But I think the unfortunate truth is what that requires then is for us to do our homework and go backwards and start, if we want to make things that aren't local landmarks that we've been treating like local landmarks in districts in the past, we just have to go make them. We have to make them. We can't reciprocate just because something is historically listed that they have to then follow our local ordinance. That is the part that SHPO made us change in our ordinance.
Well, I mean, that's a big task for staff. And I don't know if that can happen in the next decade. I mean, on this map that you're showing right here, I see 3 significant structures that are no longer covered by this commission: the West Height Manor Historic District, the Sumner High School and an athletic field, and the Mather Hall, St. Augustine Hall. All of those are on the National Register, but aren't local landmarks.
So there's a good and a bad to that. Yes, we technically lose that through that, let's call it revised interpretation, if you will. But what we were able to add or maybe even keep in the local ordinance is there are certain things that we listed that make something eligible to be a local landmark. While I cannot automatically treat something or make something a local landmark just because it's state and federal, if something is state and federal, that does make it eligible for us in our ordinance to become a local landmark. We just got to go through the process. So it might actually be simpler than we think. It might actually just be a landmarks application. And we say, hey, Wyandotte High is both a state and federal, I think it's both state and federal, I think that's right. It's both a state and federal landmark, but it's not a local landmark. Here's an application to make it a local landmark. All the documentation's already been done in its state and federal designation, nomination, formation process. Do we agree that it should be a local landmark or not? It could be as simple as just an agenda on our next, an item on our next agenda. And again, we can apply for those and we can have others apply for those. So I think it will require us to go back and do some homework for sure though.
I may be kind of oversimplifying this a little bit or not understanding it well, but I think the simplification that you are describing, Gunnar, is something there that would make it easier on us in many instances. The other thing that I am seeing in this, maybe oversimplifying it, is the state, through all our negotiations, you can delegate authority to do this and this and this, but you cannot delegate responsibility. And that's kind of what it boils down to me, that the state has this responsibility. They may delegate authority to us in certain instances on certain items to make decisions or highly qualified recommendations, but we cannot overstep the ultimate responsibility for those decisions. If everybody understands what I'm saying.
Mr. Chairman, one concern would be that I think it's for practical purposes, I think pursuing Gunnar's conversation, it would be a good thing to try to bring these state and federal sites under our jurisdiction. But in the process, I think we need to be very careful that we don't set up a system where an applicant has to go through 2 or 3 application processes. I think a project needs to be approved here or in Topeka, but not, I'm hesitant to make them apply to 2 different places, get 2 different permissions for the same project.
I agree with you entirely on that, Hank, and that is something that's been on my mind for a number of years. And I think these negotiations with the state, as we're trying to do it now, I believe is setting a framework whereby our designation and a state designation actually could be accomplished at the same time.
And I would just want to be 100% clear here. what I've told SHPO and what I expect over the next 10 years, Mr. Schrader, is within 10 years, we're not there yet, but we are working towards building the capacity internally to be able to do this. There's nothing that's preventing us from doing all the work of SHPO, except for tax credits, at the local level. There's not many CLGs that have that authority delegated to them in the state of Kansas, but that can happen. And that's what I think that should be our goal. We should be wanting to do all of that ourselves locally and have the staff to do that locally. We just haven't been proactive about historic preservation for quite some time. So I think we need to work towards that ability so that in 10 years that it is one process, it all goes through us and we do it all except for state tax credits. But that does raise a very specific strategy between now and then about how we want to handle these landmarks. Because one of the first things that we had Ms. Dambek do, our Vista, is catalog everything and tell me every historic property in Wyandotte County, tell me if it's local, state, and or federal. And so we have the information to go through and say, okay, we have X number that aren't local, that are these things. And I think what we need to do for a future landmarks commission hearing is sort of categorize them, right? Because a school that's landmarked in a residential neighborhood, that's an Italianate style design, that's in a residential neighborhood of shotgun houses, well, maybe that doesn't necessarily need a landmark and therefore an environs buffer and therefore our review. Maybe we just need to focus on that building, school, church, whatever. And it's okay that SHPO does that for us in the interim. But it might be a little bit different for West Type Manor, right? Maybe we do immediately want those C of A's back and have that local control for whatever reason. And maybe that should be the ones, those are the ones we target first. But let us do our homework a little bit on our end, and we'll come back with a recommendation at a future agenda on how we should approach local nominations to make up for all of these changes in our ordinance.
Thank you, Gunnar. Thank everyone for their comments here. I think one thing to keep in mind real quickly so we can let Vincent move on is the fact that we look at 10 years as being a long time. I've been to some seminars, webinars, etc. The esteemed city of Philadelphia, the center of this country's beginnings, it took 30 years to kind of establish and even start to establish this process. We are laying the groundwork, ladies and gentlemen, and Hank's comments have been very, very appropriate to this, is the fact we are laying the groundwork and the final results probably will be after we are long and gone from this commission. But you can't build a structure if you don't have the foundation, and it's up to us to build that foundation. So I would hope or if there's other comments, questions, feel free to ask. But Vincent, let's continue and see if we can't get some other questions.
Sounds great. And by the way, this kind of conversation you're having is exactly what you need to. You discovered there was a fly in the ointment. You can resolve it. I think you all have the right mission ahead of you. And by the way, having been somebody that oversaw CLG activities for the state of Illinois, as well as having been on serving in a landmark commission, these kind of things are not particularly unique to what's going on in the unified government. This happens all the time. And it's a matter of just making sure that you just continue to hone as you go forward. So Mazel tov, good luck. And frankly, I will say one thing. I do want to add one thing. And Cynthia, if you want to add anything to this, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Almost all communities that are typical to, say, a city such as Kansas City, Kansas, or Wyandotte County, there are often much more national register properties than there are locally landmarked properties. And one of the reasons is typically national register is honorific, and it does, for income generating properties, have a carrot associated with it. Locally landmarked properties are typically looked at as having a stick attached to them. So as you go through the process, it's typically much easier to get national register listing than it is to get locally landmarked listing. Would you concur with that, Dr. Ammerman?
Absolutely. And I think it is that the honorary, the the connotation of national significance and national register. But that's the economic impact for that designation. Unified government is unique in that it is a unified government, and has, and deals with one entity. In Kansas, in Wichita and Sedgwick County is another good example though to follow, because it has we have the geographic settings of Wichita and then its broader county. Las Vegas is another that I'm working with. It's another good example because Clark County is bigger than Las Vegas, and most of the historic that isn't designated yet areas are located within the county, but it's not a CLG because it's not a proper city. And so there's a tension there. And so while everyone is excited to have nationally recognized properties, they don't have the financial structure to benefit and preserve those properties long term for neighborhoods. So yes, I would agree. Those are good examples.
I would make one final comment. I think it goes back to one of your earlier screens, and it's 5-letter word, TRUST, trust. What is the trust within your local community, trust to the state, and trust to the national level? And I think there's a different degree in all of those. Not belating that subject, the floor is back yours again, Vincent.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Ammerman. So I want to tell you just a quick story about my experience as a commissioner. My mother just passed away. I was 25 years old, had moved back to my historic city, hometown, and was made a commissioner within a few months of moving back because I had a degree in architecture, interest in historic preservation, etc. I was approached by an old family friend at one of my first meetings, and he was an attorney representing a client. Now, this was long before I understood what ex parte discussions were, and he said, "Hey, my client does great work, blah, blah, blah. This will be good for the community, yada, yada. Go ahead, review it, but, we think you'll want to approve it." Here I am, this esteemed attorney of 60 years old with this white hair and all that stuff, saying this to me. I'm like, it was the property next to this beautiful old Queen Anne structure. And by the way, as you may note, I am not close to 25 years old anymore. So this is what it looked like on the side. So I'm standing on the property that was in question. This is what they built. I want you all to know this photo was taken, during that commission meeting, after that commission meeting was my first date with my future wife. And I almost blew her off because I said, I got put on this commission. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I'll show up eventually. Her mom made her get dressed, by the way. I don't think she thought I was coming. But my wife and I have been married for 26 years. I took this picture last year. Your decisions have long-lasting impact. And that's why you have to give them the responsibility and obligation to do your homework and really understand what's behind that. I can't even hardly drive down this street without my skin crawling. Thank God it doesn't live in the neighborhood my in-laws do. So with that, let's talk about the standards. This is kind of what we're going to wrap up on. All right. I'm sure that types of standards. I used to give this talk a long time ago, and it was mostly for people doing historic tax credit projects, which again is the carrot for nationally registered properties. You'll see that there's a standard for preservation, rehabilitation. Thank you. Restoration and reconstruction. 90% of what everybody deals with is the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. Right there. You all, 99% of what you're going to be doing is this. Okay. So this is it in a nutshell. And I know there's some changes about how you're reviewing things, et cetera, but I'm sure you've tried to be consistent in the past. It's the only thing you can stand on. These are subjective. We'll be talking about that, but trying to be consistent in your decisions will allow you to be strong in against any opposition, including from the Board of Commissioners, that you are consistently doing this work. I will say this, and you see the little caveat at the bottom. A property that's going through historic preservation investment tax credits, a tax credit project that's going to get 20% federal, 25% state tax credits, has a different level of review than does a typical certificate of appropriateness. You all do not deal with interiors unless maybe there's an addition or something like that that's impacting it. Tax credit properties do. Tax credit properties do not care what kind of fence you put on the property. If there was never a fence there historically, they don't care about anything besides the envelope of the building. You all do. And you actually go beyond that because you care about the environs. So understanding the context of where you're at. And so we're looking at this again, specifically for certificates of appropriateness for locally landmarked structures. So this is one of my favorite deals. This is what rehabilitation means. Because people throw around words like renovation, restoration, rehabilitation. What you all are involved with is rehabilitation, typically. When somebody is altering the building, if you're dealing with preservation, that's making sure that original materials are always maintained. You're going back to a specific time frame, and it's a very meticulous process. You may want to do preservation, but that's not necessarily your charge. Renovation, in the word, is renew. There's a new part of it, and that's slightly different. And then obviously, when you're doing what you're talking about, you can see the descriptions here. We'll go through them individually. There are, you know what, I'll leave that until we get to the pictures and you'll understand. There are issues with regard to periods of time in that, but we'll discuss that in a bit. But the most important thing to understand is, for better or for worse, all you wonderful people are not the taste police. This is how people often view landmarks commissions. And you just can't be, subjective, inconsistent, and saying, well, I think this should be good or not. And I'll tell one very quick story in this regard. It's akin to this. I showed you that church that we got listed in the National Register. in Kansas City by Rockhurst University. When it was up for being approved by the State Advisory Council in the state of Missouri, when the chair of the board asked if any of the commissioners, any board members had any comments, the first person who made a comment said, "Hey, look, I'm no big fan of Frank Lloyd Wright, but I think that this project is probably acceptable." That had nothing, being a fan of Frank Lloyd Wright has nothing to do with your obligations. You may be a huge fan of Italianate structures and not like modernist structures, but you have to look at the, if you're looking at a 1930s Art Moderne building, you have to evaluate it based on the standards and criteria for that time period. Okay? Don't be the taste police. All right. Woo. These are the 10 standards. And I'm sure you all are familiar with them, and I'm sure a number of you have had reviews on them. I'm going to use examples that I know from my past that are applicable. And I'm going to group them together because most of these do kind of get grouped together in an explanation. All right. Number one, you want to do minimal change to the building if possible. This idea shall be used for a historic purpose or in a new use. Old school buildings that are turned into apartments are not for educational purposes, but with minimal changes, keeping corridors, keeping the auditorium open, those kind of things, keeping the windows, and we'll talk about windows in a little bit. That's what's important to this. And that's really where number 2 comes in. Windows, if you've ever seen an historic building, and I'm glad we have a glass man on here. If you've ever seen an historic building that may have had what's known as true divided light windows, where they have the muttons in them, the cross pieces of wood, and then somebody goes in and removes those and puts in the ones with the fake muttons that are just a little applique behind it, it gives a different look. Or if somebody goes in with steel frame windows and a wood window with a bronze glazing, and then the glass is smoked, I always say it looks like the building's wearing sunglasses. It changes the look of the building. So something as simple as the type of glazing you use, or if it's a 2-inch mullion versus, or, a 2-inch mullion versus a 1/2-inch mullion, that makes a real difference. And I know some people have a problem with this, but it's one of the reasons that commissions like this exist, so that you can help people understand why it's important. So let me show you an example. This is the first commercial building I ever, as his architecture studio. It dates. Sorry, I got a sign that my internet was unstable. So this particular building, dating from the 19-teens, is pretty simple. It's a beautiful example of the Prairie School of Architecture. And this individual was a student of Frank Lloyd Wright's. But you see it, all it really is it's a stucco building with just a little bit of wood applique on here. None of these are really structural pieces. I mean, these brackets here do help hold up this piece. But most of the rest of this is basically for a design aesthetic. You remove it and it changes the building dramatically. And so that's still a cool building. That's not this building. This is easily identifiable as Prairie School. And frankly, replacing these pieces of wood is not, if you own this building, that's not going to make or break you if you have to replace those pieces of wood. So that's really about keeping these distinct characteristics. It's number 3 and number 4. this is really about what is historic and what is not. I'm going to show you a picture here of a building that was built within a national, it's in the environs of a national historic landmark district. That is the highest designation that the National Register gives. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. We won't get into that detail, but the bottom line is this is a very significant area. And somebody thought, oh, because there's historic properties here, we need to make our infill look historic. And the problem was, I think they were thinking of ye old historic-y with like an accented goo over the ye or something. I'm not sure what it was, but you'll see in a second. The other one is certain properties actually have evolved over time. And those characteristic additions actually become significant in their own right. So let's see what that looks like. This is the ye old historic-y infill project in this National Historic Landmark area. You can see somehow here on the bottom close up that they thought that a crenellated roof from some Flemish influence was somehow historic. And I'm not sure what historic type of design had square windows in the middle of standing seam metal roofs. But this is something that somebody will look at. They'll hire a very bad architect and ask them to look at a magazine or a catalog as to what they can build using styrofoam features, and this is what you get. So the only thing that this is okay about, in my opinion, is anybody with any sense can tell that this is at least new construction and will not be confused with what is really historic. I'm sorry if any of you know who did this project, please don't tell them. So here's the flip side. So that was number 3. And it's called historicizing. This is number 4, where, and you'll find this, I guarantee you, out in some parts of Wyandotte County where a rural farmhouse has had multiple additions. You don't just care about what was the original house and not care about what was added on later. The same with this. It's obvious if you looked at this, you wouldn't know it wasn't designed as one piece, but it was designed basically almost 15 years apart. But at that point, they wanted to make sure that it was similar. So this is what this addition is on the one on the right, this beautiful Romanesque Revival building. So, all right. Number 5, distinctive features, finishes, and construction techniques shall be preserved. To me, that goes back again to what I showed you on that first slide, where just the little bit of wood framing makes an amazing difference on what it looks like. Now, this is where you guys are going to get into number 6. Deteriorated historic features shall be repaired rather than replaced. It's typically, not always, but typically less expensive to repair something than to replace it, especially with wood windows and that. But people often say, well, but I want, I want energy efficiency. What we like to recommend then is doing, for instance, historic storm windows or interior storm windows where it doesn't affect the exterior view of the property. These are readily available products. Can they be expensive? Sure. But again, it's your charge to try to do what's best, and removing historic wood windows, true divided light windows with muntins and that, and replacing them with fake muntins and aluminum clad windows, in my opinion, doesn't meet the standards. Windows are the single biggest issue typically commissions have to deal with in that regard. So learning what products are out there and how to deal with them is critically important for you. This is part of your advocacy. I'm not saying that you recommend that they use a particular product, but telling them that there are resources and maybe even deferring them, for instance, to the Historical Society, where the Historical Society can say, hey, look at Marvin Windows, look at this guy down in Nevada, Missouri, look at this contractor. That's what you can do and help in advocating for the right solution. So again, number 5 is number 5 is particular distinctive features shall be preserved. And if you do have to replace, you do it by matching, and we typically say by doing it in kind. And that's where, for instance, if you're doing brickwork, masonry work, and you're putting in new mortar joints, that if the original mortar joint was recessed so that the edge of the brick sticks out, and it was a particular color, typically for older buildings, especially pre-1920, many of the bricks are a softer red brick. They'll be glazed, but typically they're a softer brick. And if you go in with the wrong type of mortar joint, with too much Portland cement content and not enough lime or sand and water, then the mortar joint becomes stronger than the brick and it will spall. And we can talk about that. I'll show an example in just a bit here in that regard. So that's why you want to make sure that the context is done. And I can't stress this enough. Your advocates will be historic preservation experts, contractors who know how to do proper masonry work, window folks that know what they're doing. We live in a large city, in a very large metropolitan area, and there are a number of folks that can supply materials and have this expertise in doing the work. So when somebody says it can't be done, you will have the tools to argue with them. So, and again, I go back here. This is just one of my favorite buildings. Again, in my hometown, I like to brag a little bit. In the upper left-hand corner, this is zinc cresting at the top here. If that's gone, if they say, look, it's rotting and it falls away, will it still be a beautiful building with this polychromatic, mansard roof and all that, and these colonnaded windows? Sure. But those rose zinc cresting makes a huge difference on this property. And will it cost a little bit of money to redo them? Yes. And do they have to be zinc? No. From that length, you could probably have them done in aluminum for much less, or cast in something else. So below that, you see the brickwork. You see how fine the joints are here. Not just anybody can do this kind of work, and making sure it's done properly is a big thing. And finally, to the right, I'm just showing you a building with a lot of different windows. You have the transom-like windows over the public space. This is in Boston. This was an old type of townhome where you would have had commercial on the ground floor, and you would have had residential above. Crazily, it's still to this day commercial on the ground floor and residential above. But you can see all the uniqueness. Now, this has something that I am probably fairly confident that these windows here were not single glazed like this when they were originally installed. And you can see there's a storm window that's on the outside. Things change, and you can't make people go back if they buy a house that doesn't have that, even though it originally did. You can't force somebody to do that, but you can encourage them and again, direct them to resources if you think it would be, if that makes sense to you all. All right, we're halfway through them. All right. This is a huge deal. This goes back to what I was saying about the masonry work. I can't stress this enough. Never, ever, 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 never, ever, never allow somebody to sandblast, glass bead blast, walnut shell blast, anything, a masonry structure. And you shouldn't do it on wood either. It'll tear right through the wood. There are very few instances. I can give you some examples of very large timber interior members, for instance, interior columns on warehouses, or metal like steel windows and that can be have an abrasive blasting, but never on a masonry building. Chemical and physical chemical treatments can be done, but they have to be done properly. Kansas City and actually Wyandotte County neighbor here, you have one of the best companies in the country that actually do this type of work. It's called ProSoco. It's out in DeSoto, and they make a series of products. And I'm not saying use ProSoco. There's a number of other companies, including one up in Milwaukee that I've used historically, that are effective in removing grime and or paint and other things that you may want to remove off of a masonry building, including that historic church I showed you. It's a limestone clad church now, and we have removed lichen and other stains off of the building, but it's done in a very responsible manner. Everything from the tip, the spray, how much PSI, pounds per square inch of water are sprayed on the building. It's all based on the material. And I will share this. And again, this is where becoming more educated as commissioners and using professionals. Limestone buildings, stone buildings, typically need a different cleaning product than a brick building does. Some use alkaline base and are cleaned with an acidic base. Some are acidic and are cleaned with an alkaline base. And they're very specific things. And being able to direct people, and we'll talk about this right at the end, being able to direct folks where to go to understand this better is incumbent upon you all. Finally, number 8 here, significant archaeological resources. This is probably not a huge deal for you all, but I think you can encourage people that may find things of import on their property, how to not disturb them or to mitigate them. You don't have to tear it out if you don't need to. If you find a cistern in your backyard and it's okay to leave it there, do it. It's part of the mystique of your home. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Here's the backyard cistern. If you want to put a plate over the top, or you want to turn it into a planter, do that. Make it a fun thing. But there's no need to demolish it if you don't have to. The building on your left is an amazing example of ecclesiastical architecture from the 1870s. And sadly, this building with these wonderful Italianate and Gothic features on it, it's just an amazing church. During the time of the bicentennial in 1976, when everybody was trying to fix everything up, this building was fully sandblasted. This is an 1876 soft brick building. This building will likely not make it to 2076. The only solution on this building at this point to keep it from completely corroding is to replace every brick. At some point, it will become structurally unstable. Now, they may be able to do something where they build out a framework on the interior of the church, but that you're talking millions and millions of dollars. And this is what happens, as you see in the upper right-hand corner. The glazing of the brick, and this one didn't even hardly have any glazing. It was such an early brick. When it's sandblasted, what it allows is moisture to get into the brick. Brick needs to breathe. And if you break this open, basically when the freeze thaw process happens that we get here in the Midwest, the water will stay in the bricks, and when it freezes, it will expand as water does, and it will crack the brick. And you all have seen this. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but as you can see here, chunks will fall off, and eventually the whole thing will disintegrate. And as you can tell from this structure, there's a lot of weight bearing down on it. It'll be very interesting to see how this is preserved over time, if it can be. All right. So all those other things, I think you can, they're pretty black and white, so to speak. Number 9 and 10, the last two, are where most of the discussions happen when it comes to the standards. Because people don't understand what the point of them is. So I will try to do my best. Cynthia, Gunnar, whomever, any of the commissioners, if you want to add on your thoughts on this, please feel free. I'm just going to read number 9. New additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction shall not destroy historic materials that characterize the property. The new work shall be differentiated from the old and shall be compatible with the massing, size, scale, and architectural features to protect the historic integrity of the property and its environs. What this means is you don't historicize, you don't necessarily match exactly for an addition that somebody's looking at it. You can't tell what's old and new, which is what confuses a lot of people. And you don't destroy part of the historic to do the addition. And this is often difficult for some architects to handle. And there's ways of doing this, and I'll show you a couple examples. And then finally, it's related to it. New additions and or related new construction shall be undertaken in a manner if removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of the historic property would be unimpaired. And I'll show you an example of where that's possible. Having fun yet? We're wrapping up. Okay. These are don'ts. These beautiful townhomes had this modernist addition done to them. And the argument that the architect made was, well, when you look at the shape of the townhome and you look at its height and you look at its material, I'm matching that. Well, fenestration, which is basically the openings and the rhythm of the building where this part sits out, this part sits in, this part comes out, this part comes in, the crenellated roof work, none of that is at all understood in this addition. Yes, you did use bricks and you do have glass, but there's no relationship at all here. Okay. I just like to show this one on the next one, only because this old church, there's just a fascinating addition to me. It's not appropriate, but again, they're trying to show that it is something new. It's just too new. Okay. And frankly, it doesn't work. The two on the bottom, when these were added, and you can really see it on this one, they effectively tore out the entire first floor walls on this to add this addition on here. So that if you were to tear this addition off, which I frankly don't think is a bad looking addition, though there's issues with regard to the material use in that, you would have removed about 1/3 of that structure's exterior wall. So, and then this one's just, I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand this missed the boat. Okay. Now, here are a couple things, though, that you can do. And I just want to recommend how these might work. So this is a property I developed a number of years ago, 20 plus years ago. This picture was taken fairly recently. The new owners are not keeping the paint up. Paint's a reversible condition. I can't get mad at them, but I can't stand seeing the flaking up there. But this is an ADA ramp, and they've done something weird here, but an ADA ramp doesn't have to look like an angled ramp. What we did here is we installed a straightaway column here, even though what's below it, and you can see the handrail below it, is where the ramp is. But this kind of, and done properly, this is where your eye's supposed to be. The other thing is this hedgerow was originally all even. For whatever reason, they've cut the hedgerow so that you're now emphasizing the ramp here on this historic structure. There's ways that good designers can get away with doing additions that play off the symmetry, the lines, etc., and you can get away with other elements. Now this one here, if we were in a room, I'd ask for a hands to see if you all think this is an appropriate addition here. I personally think it is. Does it exactly match the roof or the windows and the roof configuration? No, but as you all know, and you can see it in the back here, when you're in an urban environment, different roof lines are not atypical. Even these windows don't necessarily match on the side of this building here. Different roof structures. I think this is an appropriate new addition, though I'm not thrilled with the windows up here. And I think that if you look at the materials, the standard old glazing that which you would see with a bulkhead underneath it, this is, and even the doors inset there, this is kind of an appropriate new infill. Okay, so you don't have to match things, and you really frankly shouldn't necessarily. This is where it's tough for you commissioners to go from being the taste police to understanding the standards and how to operate. So here's my last one. This is a complex issue. This church was bought as a residential property, and the new owner built this addition onto it. This is one of the keys here. Whoops, excuse me. This is one of the keys here. This can be removed, this link, without necessarily having major damage to the original historic structure. This roof line does somewhat emulate this. I think this is a stretch, but the argument is that this material here matches this stone or this concrete stuccoed fencing. But this idea of a huge single window here, it's not like the rose window in a church, and a front-loaded parking, a garage, is the antithesis of what you would see for an appropriate building like this. I will share that garages can be front loaded, but there are many different design criteria that you can follow to not make this look like this. They can look like historic doors. They can look like walls and doors. They still operate. Is that more expensive? Sure, but it's part of this process of what's determining what's important for you all in your neighborhoods. All right, so let me wrap with this. You have tons of resources. You'll you'll have access to this 30 plus years. They go into every one of these details in greater, oops, let's get that open here, into greater depth. This is all about masonry. And it talks about what kind of masonry you have, how to deal with it, protecting and maintaining it. If somebody says, hey, don't worry, if I sandblast this, I'm going to put a protective coating over it. Please note that in 99.9% of the time, that protective coating in a few years will actually cause more damage because it will actually work almost as a glue and will pull off more of the stone and it will spall even faster. So, but this is what you can learn. I mean, you know, if you're looking for fun, this will explain, you know, how the process works. And this is just one of many. Again, and I will provide this link for you all. Go back to here. And there are other things that are available, and I'll show you this one. You can actually work with people, for instance, on sustainability. And this is the last thing. There are all kinds of new illustrated guidelines for understanding what to do with regard to solar panels, doing insulated windows, how to address all these different things for large commercial buildings, all these kind of things. And I encourage you to look at that as well. I'm giving you a lot of homework, but I think that's what I was paid to do. So with that, I think I've used my allotted time. Let me go back. Uh-oh, it's not going back here. Sorry. There we go. I'll show you this. Do you all know this building over in 18th and Vine area? This is arguably the single most important building in the entire city of Kansas City, Missouri. Until Liberty Memorial was designated a National Historic Landmark a few years ago, this was the one and only single structure in the entire city of Kansas City, Missouri that was a National Historic Landmark. Does it look like a particularly impressive architectural masterpiece? No, it's what happened there and the people that crossed that threshold. So although individual buildings may not knock your eyes out, they all have their reason for being important. And I can't stress that enough to you commissioners. So my time's up, hopefully right on time. And Gunnar, this is your giant finale.
Thanks, Vince. I think I just wanted to take a few minutes, and we sort of broached a couple of subjects earlier on in the presentation, but I just kind of wanted to lay it out for you all again in terms of next steps for us within the department. I think we had noted earlier we're going to do a little bit of homework, and in a future agenda item, we hope to bring to you sort of a strategy we think for kind of working back and landmarking some things locally that we, whether they be districts or landmarks. I think we can bring that to you at a future agenda item. We have Cynthia Ammerman is on the call today to kind of listen in, as well as Emma, and they're obviously charged with the historic district downtown, which is a huge project for not just this commission, but for the entire UG. It's been a long, long time since we've attempted to designate anything of this magnitude in historic Kansas City, Kansas, or in downtown for that matter. So I think that's a big project. We've talked a lot about how we're going to need your help and assistance in all parts of that moving forward. I think the other thing that we're working on over the next, let's say, year is we are going to go after another historic preservation fund. At a previous meeting, I think we had decided to seek funding to do a historic preservation plan, so that we can sort of map out all the things that we've been talking about as projects and how to prioritize, align those, and then with said plan, begin to execute and move forward with this commission's help. So I think that's another huge project that's going to be ahead of us if we receive that grant. And the truth is, we'll probably just keep applying for grants until we get it. We've established a rapport, and to be honest with you, it's not too competitive to win historic preservation funding grants in the state of Kansas. Not a lot of people go after them. A lot of people don't even know that it exists, and when they do, very rarely are they the cities of our size and historical relevance, maybe. So we have a bunch of big things ongoing right now. So my big finale would just be with our new CAO, interim CAO, and with our new mayor. I think we need to redouble our efforts. We had planned all of these moves under the previous administration, and that administration has changed to a degree where I think we need to reevaluate and reassess how we execute these projects. Each one of you is appointed by a board of commissioner. I would highly recommend that you reach out to them and talk to them about what they expect you to do in this sort of new board of commissioners, if you will, moving forward. I do think it will require us to recalibrate how we pursue all of these projects moving forward with the support of our board of commissioners, and therefore, kind of funneling up to the CAO and the mayor. I'm doing my part internally, but things are changing. If you haven't seen them already, I do expect things to change for all parts of the unified government moving forward. This mayor does plan a lot of big moves. You've seen some of the committees that he's put out. I would encourage you all to participate in those if you haven't already. A couple of those are taking applications for local citizens to participate, but I can't stress it enough. We had set on a course that was not technically the course of this CAO and this mayor or this board, because it has changed composition. We should go back and do our homework and relay that foundation before we get too deep in these projects and too deep in these processes. And I need your help doing that. That's my finale. You're muted, Mr. Chair. Mr. Maddox, you're on mute.
Chairman Meredith, we cannot hear you. You're on mute.
He's working on it, I think.
How about now? Can everybody hear me?
Yes,
There you
we
are.
can.
All right. My additional comments would be, there has been, many of you have served on this commission longer than I have. You've seen the changes. We've set a course of action. I think, even with the comments Gunner's made, I think we can continue on our path in preservation. We may have to alter our approach a little, but I think if we all get to our commissioners, we get to the new administration and convey our message, we can succeed in that. I appreciate everyone's comments tonight. Director Hand, our invited guests, which did a fabulous job, but I would be remiss in my position knowing that I have newer members on this commission that over the course of the past year or so has had a multitude of questions. They wanted to learn more, stated they needed to learn more. So I would ask any and all, but especially my three newest members, Miss Beverly, Miss Mickey Hill, and my Vice Chairman, Karen Fritsch. Have you had your questions answered tonight? Do you have any others that you wish to ask tonight? Because this is the real learning session for you all. And if they weren't answered tonight, or if you think of some, please convey them to me. I will get them directed to Director Hand, and we will try to get back to our guru, Mr. Vincent, and try to find some more resources, etc., for you. So I will throw it open for some brief questions. before I close the meeting tonight? Are there any further questions that you would like to direct to our esteemed guest or our director of staff?
One of my questions is, so thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me the opportunity to ask another question. One of my questions is so specific, I feel a little hesitant to ask it, but when you're dealing with like brick and say, for instance, you need tuck pointing. I've seen proposals from different companies suggesting that it needed to be water blasted to make sure that all the loose mortar is removed before the tuck pointing process. I mean, is that safe, or is that a process that should be done?
So cleaning a building, we used to always say, just, if you just can use a hose to clean the building, that's great. The key is, if you look at the end of the cleaning tool, they'll have a little spray nozzle, and that spray nozzle can be twisted so that the fan can be very wide or can be very pointed. If it's very pointed, it can cause a lot of damage. So the spray and then the PSI, the pounds per square inch, makes a difference. So, being able to say, look to the standards where the technical briefs will tell you, use this type of pressure, don't exceed this. That's where you can really benefit from that. And yes, most painters will hose down a property before they paint it. It's just the level of pressure. And can I add one comment, because I didn't get to do it earlier?
Feel free.
I will argue, I've been blessed in my career to get to see a lot of cool things, work on a lot of great projects. I will argue, and I used to work for the National Park Service, the Quindaro ruins to me are one of the two or three most important sites in this country that should be a national park site that is not. And I think you should all be charged with making that happen. And I'll be happy to carry any water you need in that process. It is the American story of the 19th century that has yet to be told. This is where the Civil War started. And it is the activities that occurred in this area and the fights that went on that this story must be told. And if it's part of the Civil Rights Trail that's in place now, you may have seen the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum just got added to the Civil Rights Trail. My project that I'm working on right now is, I've been absolutely blessed during the pandemic that the Satchel Paige home came my way, and I'm in charge of redeveloping the Satchel Paige home. And I'm like a little kid in a candy shop. Thank you, Mickey. I cannot tell you how excited I am. And so I think there's this whole story here that needs to be told. So Gunnar, thank you. That was my 30-second on top of the soapbox for Quindaro ruins. So I can't wait to read the book, the new book coming out.
That's great.
Beverly, just a note, loose mortar is going to be removed in the tuck pointing process anyway. So they certainly don't need to water blast it out of there to start with.
Oh, okay, because they said, well, we're gonna, clean it up and seal it and all the things that you just got through saying, Vincent, about the bad things about after sandblasting, but okay. And I appreciate the resources that you mentioned tonight, and I look forward to getting those links.
And by the way, your SHPO architects can really provide a lot of the gravitas behind these recommendations.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Schrader, did you have a comment or a question? I saw something a minute ago.
No, not really. Other than I will make a reminder to my subcommittee members, Beverly, Mickey, and Karen. We've got a meeting scheduled for 5 p.m. on the 15th with Cynthia and her group to just get an update on what's going on with the downtown commercial historic district and what assistance we can offer them. So
Jim,
that's just a reminder.
is that a Zoom meeting?
Yeah.
Can
I don't know
anyone
if-
sit, can anyone sit in on it?
We just have to make sure we don't have a quorum.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
We can
Thank you.
report.
Now, there'll have to be an agenda published, and I'll work with Janet on that, and we'll do minutes.
Daniel, what constitutes a quorum for us? If I may ask again.
Well, it's gonna be a majority of people. Out of 11, an 11-member body, that would be 6 people.
If no more than 6, if 6 of us attend, if no more than
Oh,
5
Gunner's shaking
attend,
his hand. Is only 10 members right now?
I don't, it's kind of a mess right now.
yeah. Let's
we
say
only
we've
have
got
10.
10 right now.
Okay.
Gina,
then
I won't be able to be there, so David, you can take my seat because I have a schedule conflict. There we go.
Okay.
Okay.
All
I
right.
just
Sorry,
wanted
Mickey.
to
Well,
know.
we'll let you know what's going on. Well,
All right,
since you're
let
not
me
there,
know
we'll
and-
assign duties to you.
Assign duties to me. Thank you. I just curious, keeping on top of you. Not that I don't trust you.
Since David's going to take my seat, you can assign my duties to him.
Oh. Are there any other questions this evening? If not, thank you very much, Vincent. And all our esteemed guests, thank you everyone for your comments. I hope you have learned and it was instructional. I thank you very much. I look forward to our next meeting in March, which our dear secretary, Ms. Parker, the date, please, if you have it.
Yes, it is March the 7th. And at this time, we do have a historic landmark designation application on the agenda. That's the first one since 2013. And we've got a couple of certificate of appropriateness.
All right. I would also request that Director Hand, if we could have an update on the Sour Castle situation, please.
Got it.
All right. Thank you very much. Good evening to all.
Thanks,
I
everybody.
appreciate your attendance.